injuries were so brutal that people said she resembled Miss Pac-Man. 32-year-old Alejandra Ico Chubb was a mother of 3 from Guatemala. She was in a relationship with 42-year-old Mario Ical, and behind closed doors, it was a completely different story. On October 29th of 2018, Mario came home and he was filled with jealousy. He believed that Alejandra wasn't being truthful about seeing her sister that day, and instead of talking to her about it, he completely lost control. He grabbed a machete and stormed into the bedroom where Alejandra was resting, and in a fit of rage, he struck with full force, severing both of her hands and leaving a horrific wound across her face from ear to ear. The violence was so extreme that later on people would compare her face wounds to the arcade character Miss Pac-Man. To make matters even worse, Alejandra was alive for the entire thing, and in the background you can hear her children screaming while Mario is recording it all. Once Mario was done, he fled the scene, and since neighbors could hear screaming coming from their home, they waited for him to leave, and then they went to go check on Alejandra. Once they went to go check in on her, she was barely alive, and once help arrived for her, it was already too late. 2 days later, Mario was captured, and when he was questioned, he admitted to everything and stated that jealousy was his motive. In August of 2023, nearly 5 years later, Mario was sentenced to 50 years in prison for femicide.
He sadistically tortured her for 10 days in a shed before unaliving her. Helen left her 4-year-old daughter, Tegan Skibba, in the care of her boyfriend, Jonathan Richardson. Jonathan took Tegan to a shed that was incredibly unsanitary and covered in urine and feces. Jonathan confined Tegan in this shed for 10 days. During that time, Jonathan whipped and beat Tegan with extension cords and a wooden rod. Jonathan bit Tegan all over her body, leaving 66 deep bite marks on her skin. He used duct tape to bind Tegan and keep her restrained inside the shed. Jonathan even recorded a video of Tegan begging and crying to use the bathroom. In the video, Tegan is crying and saying, "When I have to pee, I promise I will tell someone," while Jonathan is screaming at her to speak up. Jonathan even horrifically SA'd Tegan. Tegan passed away from brain swelling caused by blunt force trauma to the head. Jonathan was sentenced to be unalived and remains incarcerated, waiting for his sentencing. I honestly believe that this is a pure act of evil. But what do you guys think about this case?
To walk up to a dead body in a casket and do this is absolutely insane. I mean, I've obviously seen so much covering cases all of these years. I've never seen anything like it. It was April 2015 at Moore Funeral Home in Oklahoma. Stunning Tabitha Lynch was only 38 years old when she passed away from an illness. As you can imagine, her family were devastated and they were really struggling to cope. When on the 30th of that month, a woman waltzed into the funeral home where she was being kept, and she explained that she was a makeup artist here to help make the deceased look good for the funeral. And this is really not unusual if you've got any kind of like open casket or you've got a viewing, the family are going to come and see the deceased. They want them to look their best. On that day, Shayna Lauren Sims confidently strolled into the building explaining that she was the MUA for Tabitha. So the staff let her in, and as expected, she kind of reached into the coffin and they were kind of like, "We'll leave you to it." But not a single person could have ever predicted what was going to happen next. Staff didn't notice anything particularly wrong at first. Then they noticed Shayna kind of throw a glob of something on the floor. This woman had taken a knife and cut Tabitha's head from the hairline to the top of her nose. She slashed her hair, threw clumps of it onto the floor, smeared her makeup, and then cut off her toe and both breasts. And it gets worse. Honestly, how she had time to do this and nobody noticed a thing wrong. She wanged out her phone and took photos of the mutilated body, then stripped off the deceased's underwear and took photographs of her private parts. But she wasn't finished. She casually walked out of the funeral home after causing absolute carnage and then went to Tabitha's house. One of her family members answered the door and Shayna introduced herself as Stephanie, and she gave them the same kind of spiel about being a makeup artist. Said, "Oh, I'm in charge of the makeup. Could you get me a photo so that I can kind of make her look as normal as possible. But they were a bit wary. Tabitha's family kind of felt like something was off about the whole situation. They then got a phone call from the funeral home explaining that somebody had been in and totally mutilated their relative, and so they bolted her inside of the house until police arrived, and good. When they arrested Shayna, she had a knife on her with Tabitha's hair on it. And when she was questioned, nobody could really figure out why the hell she had done what she did. Rumours went round that her partner had been having an affair with Tabitha, but this was never proven. And it seemed like this girl was no stranger to acting absolutely insane. She'd been involved in this crazy incident 2 weeks before. Shayna had pled guilty to assault and battery after stalking and harassing another woman. This was Christina Perez. She'd been harassing her for months. Ultimately, Shayna got given 20 years in prison for charges such as unauthorized dissection of a body, but it gets worse. In a dramatic turn of events, she got released after just 4 years. Now, it was wild, but basically her lawyers argued about the jurisdiction of the case because Tabitha was Native American. But after a roller coaster of appeals process and reappeals, etc., Shayna was then re-arrested in 2023 after the Court of Appeals reaffirmed the previous conviction. Now, what do you guys think about that? I obviously do think that she should be behind bars. I don't think she should have ever been released in the first place, but I don't think we should have this yo-yoing where somebody is allowed to be released and then re-arrested. It feels like such a waste of everybody's time and effort. Let me know what you think in the comments, and if you like deep dives, head over to my podcast, The Born Investigation, where I post a brand new episode every single week.
This insane man kidnapped his neighbor, chained her up in his house, and held her captive for 12 days, all because she won't go on a date with him. Now, this man's name is Jeffrey Maxwell, and Jeffrey is living in Texas when this story starts, and he's always been a weird guy. One day, Jeffrey starts weirdly crushing on his neighbor. Her name's Lois. She's a deeply religious woman who keeps to herself, but Jeffrey decides he wants her. He starts persistently asking her out over and over again, to the point where it makes Lois very uncomfortable. So she rejects him and firmly tells him to stay away from her, as she should. Lois doesn't know what it is, but something about Jeffrey feels weirdly off, and she is right to trust her gut. Because a couple years earlier, this man left his wife of 11 years on the side of the road with duct tape on her mouth, a cut across her throat, and other injuries I can't say on here. His wife's name was Martha Martinez. Before they met, Martha was living in Mexico with her family. At some point, her and Jeffrey started messaging through a pen pal service, and they fell madly in love. Jeffrey asked her to move all the way to Texas so they could be together, but Martha's family did not approve. They felt like all this creepy energy from him. But Martha, being young and in love, packed her bags anyways. She flew to Texas and they got married. But almost immediately, things got dark. She realizes Jeffrey is not who he said he was. Turns out he is obsessed with chains, ropes, whips, control, and he wants her to fulfill all of his darkest fantasies. Which, fine, do what you want in the bedroom, but the problem is Martha, she was not rocking with any of that. And when she refuses, when she says no, Jeffrey just gets angry and he forces himself onto her. Her saying no actually plays into the fantasy of taking full control, and he would do as he wanted with her. I mean, he would lock her in a dark room for days all by herself, and this goes on for 11 years straight. She even gives birth to his son, and at this point she just accepts this is my life. Until one night in 1987, Jeffrey puts substances into her system that makes her fall unconscious. Then he ties her wrists and ankles up with duct tape, and he harms her in ways that I genuinely can't say on here. And at some points, he cuts her throat from ear to ear. Afterwards, he just dumps her body on the side of the road and just leaves her there for dead. But then Martha's actually found. She's rushed to the hospital, and by some miracle, she survives. She tells police everything, and Jeffrey is immediately arrested. Martha then takes her little boy and runs back to Mexico because she is terrified of Jeffrey getting out and seeking revenge on her. But while he's in jail, he's writing her these long, manipulative ass letters, just apologizing, begging, guilt tripping her to come back and forgive him. And little by little, it works. Martha returns to Texas. She stops cooperating with the police. She refuses to testify, and so Jeffrey walks free. And her fear of him getting revenge becomes reality. Because just 5 years later in 1992, Martha just disappeared. Jeffrey even writes a letter to her family pretending to be Martha, saying that she's leaving him. But her family knows it wasn't her because she always writes in Spanish and this letter is in English. And besides, she leaves behind everything: her passport, her purse, her son, things that she would never leave. But despite it being very obvious that Jeffrey has something to do with it, nothing was ever done. And this isn't even his last time hurting a woman. After Martha, he remarries another woman. Her name is Rita, and she was actually his very first wife. The two of them had a daughter together before their divorce, and honestly, it should have just stayed that way. Because within months of Jeffrey moving back in, he starts touching their daughter inappropriately. So Rita divorces him again. This time she changes her name, she moves far away with her daughter, and that's when Jeffrey moved to a new neighborhood right across the street from Lois. He becomes so fixated on her, and Louis can sense he is bad news. He even tried to kiss her once, and it disgusted her. But honestly, I think he prefers when she says no, because every rejection just made him more obsessed. Eventually, he moves away. I don't know why, but Louis finally feels some peace. Until 6 years later in 2011, Jeffrey knocks on her door again, but this time he has a sinister plan. The moment Lois opens the door, she freezes. His eyes have a look that make her uneasy, and before she can react, he pepper sprays her. Her eyes are burning, she can't see, she's trying to run, but Jeffrey chases her down, grabs her at gunpoint, and throws her into his car. He drives her 100 miles away to an isolated farmhouse. He drags her inside his garage, and he has built a chamber. In the center is a homemade deer skinning hoist. Basically an iron bar and electric winch meant for animal carcasses, but now he's using it on her. He strips her down naked, he takes her wrist and chains it onto the winch, and then he hoists her up into the air. Hanging hopelessly, she is and assaulted. And for the next 12 days, she is living through a real-life horror movie. Jeffrey chains her to a bed. He padlocks her ankles. He gags her and locks her in a wooden box so tight it literally feels like a coffin. He whips her. He assaults her with objects. At one point, Louis said that she bled for days. And she admitted before any of this happened, she had never been with a man. She said, "I wanted to die a virgin and Jeffrey ripped that from me." Eventually, Jeffrey gets really sick and the assaults start slowing down, but he still makes her sit on his lap while he's watching TV, still touching her. That is so disgusting. But then finally, Jeffrey makes a mistake. He forces her to write him a check, and when he cashes it, the bank flags it. Police show up at his house, and Louis runs to the door screaming, "I'm here, I'm here!" And finally, she is rescued. When police go inside his house, they find the chamber. The chains, the box, the whips, everything. Jeffrey confesses but had the nerve to plead not guilty. Obviously, the jury did not buy it and it took them less than an hour to convict him. He got 3 life sentences and he won't be eligible for parole until he's like 119 years old. Louis, on the other hand, had a chance to rebuild her life. Her community supported her and they bought her a brand new trailer home and even gifted her a piano. Martha has never been found and her family is still waiting for justice. Please be safe out there. I love you. Mwah. Group hug.
He escaped from death row, becoming one of America's most wanted men, and to this day, over 50 years later, we still have no idea where he is. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Mary Ellen Dana. Mary Ellen was a 14-year-old girl living in Mansfield, Ohio. She was a very intelligent young girl who absolutely loved playing with her dolls. She enjoyed doing hopscotch, riding her bike, and spending time with her friends. Their little group were always laughing together. She was part of a really big family. She had 6 siblings, and all of the children in the house had their own jobs that they had to do to help around the house. For Mary Ellen, she was responsible for washing the clothes. It was a cold evening in November 1965 when Mary Ellen opened up the dryer to see the clothes inside were still sopping wet. Realising that the dryer had broken, she piled all of the soggy clothes into a washing basket, and she and one of her sisters, Brenda, headed out to the local laundrette to get all of the clothes dried. It was later into the evening. It was already dark outside. However, the girls' mother didn't really mind them nipping out to the laundrette. It was local and they lived in an area where they really felt safe. They never had any worries, and the girls' grandmother actually lived right next door to the laundrette. As one of the load of clothes were drying, the girls realised that they didn't have enough change for the next load to get dried. So Mary Ellen opted to nip around the corner to another laundrette to get some more change. This is a journey that should have only took her around about 5 minutes
minutes, if that, walking. However, after leaving, Mary Ellen would never return. On her way there, Mary Ellen would be snatched, dragged off of the street by a tall, intimidating man. He pulled her to behind a house where Mary Ellen is trying to fight him off. She is screaming, and in order to silence her, this man put his large hands over her mouth. He tried to indecently assault Mary Ellen, who was fighting back with all of her might, and that is when he pulled out a gun and shot her twice in the abdomen. This man was 22-year-old Lester Eubanks. He was also a Mansfield native, and from a very young age he had repeatedly gotten into trouble with the police, specifically for sex crimes. In fact, on the evening that he shot Mary Ellen, he was on bail after he had been accused of raping another woman. He shouldn't have even been out on the streets. After shooting Mary Ellen, Lester made his way back home, where he jumped in the shower, pulled on some nice clothes, and headed out for a night of dancing. As he was walking to the club or wherever he was going to go, he actually passed the house where he had left Mary Ellen behind, and so he walked over to check on her, probably assuming that she was going to be dead. But she wasn't. She was clinging onto life and writhing in pain. Instead of getting help though, Lester would pick up a brick that was nearby and repeatedly struck Mary Ellen in the head until he killed her. By then, Brenda, her sister, had already went next door to their nana's house and told their nana that Mary Ellen had gone and she hadn't came back. Her nana had went out to try and search for her granddaughter, but instead discovered the police, who delivered the devastating news that Mary Ellen had been barbarically murdered. It wouldn't take police long to recover a substantial amount of evidence, and all of this evidence pointed them directly to one person, and that was Lester Eubanks. He was arrested, questioned, confessed, and then charged with the murder. At his trial, he made a very detailed confession as to what he'd done to Mary Ellen without showing an ounce of remorse like a narcissist. The jury would throw the book at Lester Eubanks and sentenced him to death by electrocution. Throughout his time on death row, Lester was given 3 separate execution dates, but for one reason or another he would be issued stay after stay after stay. On one occasion, it got to where he was going to be executed in just 2 days' time before he was given a stay. He would sit on death row for 7 years, up until Ohio abolished the death penalty, and after that his sentence was reduced to life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole. While incarcerated, he would fill his day by chatting with the guards, writing and painting. Lester was actually a pretty talented painter and he won many awards for his artwork. It's just a shame that he was a complete monster. Somehow Lester managed to talk his way onto the Honour Inmate programme. This was a programme for well-behaving, trusty inmates where they were able to do things to help prepare them for life outside of prison. This meant they were able to go out of prison to run errands with the guards, they were allowed to drive, and on some occasions they were allowed unsupervised time outside of the prison walls. And Lester, who was serving life imprisonment without parole, was given a space on this programme. On the 7th of December 1973, Lester Eubanks and 3 other prisoners from the Honour programme were taken out to do a spot of Christmas shopping. They were given normal clothes, they were given money, and taken to a shopping centre in Ohio and let them go on their way completely unsupervised. The agreement was that they would all return back to a specific meeting area at 2 p.m. where they would be taken back to the prison. However, when 2 p.m. rolled round, one prisoner didn't return, and that was 30-year-old convicted child killer, sexual predator, Lester Eubanks. Over 50 years have passed since Lester Eubanks was able to slip away out of the shopping centre, and to this day he has never been found. The police and FBI have put great efforts into trying to track him down and finding him. He was blasted on America's Most Wanted, and after this a woman contacted the FBI saying that Lester had been living with her for a couple of years, but by this point he had already moved out. When he was living with this woman, he was under the alias of Victor Young. They would discover that he would travel from state to state, going from California to Ohio to Alabama to Michigan, and while here he would work odd jobs such as painting and decorating, working in manufacturing factories, and also working as a janitor. But despite how hard they were trying to track him down, it always seemed like the authorities were just one step behind. At one point, they came within weeks of catching him. Lester Eubanks will be 82 years old. These are some age progression photos that were created of him. The FBI are still very keen to track him down and take him back into their custody.
This is one of the most bizarre cults that you have likely never heard of. The Order of the Solar Temple cult. This cult convinced their followers that they all had to die, but then aliens would come and bring them to another planet in the afterlife. And by the end of this cult, 74 people ended up losing their lives, which included children. And this is actually a cult that had two cult leaders, Joseph de Mombro and Luc Jouret. And when Joseph de Mombro, a jeweler from France, and Luc Jouret, a doctor that worked internationally, met, it was like a match made in cult hell. Both of these men were extremely obsessed with aliens, conspiracy theories, and just all things weird. And that's a lot of what their cult centered around. That the world was going to end, but aliens would come to Earth and would bring all the chosen ones to another planet in the apocalypse. In 1982, the two men started their cult, the Order of the Solar Temple, where de Mombro was the guy that kind of just had all of the crazy ideas, and then Jouret was like the young, charming frontman that would recruit all of the new members. Most cults throughout history really target like the most vulnerable people in society, people that have nowhere else to go. But the Order of the Solar Temple wanted elite members, doctors, lawyers, politicians, and influential businessmen. And all of these influential, educated, wealthy members really bought into everything that these two cult leaders had to say. And they ended up having a following of almost 500 members in 6 different countries across Europe and North America. Something else different about this cult is most cults will have one chosen one, which is their cult leader. But the Order of the Solar Temple cult convinced their followers that they were all chosen ones, that they were all divinely picked to meet each other in this life, and they were all reincarnated versions of like really influential people throughout history, like in the medieval times, or even reincarnated versions of saints. And they would put on these really elaborate rituals where everyone would wear a red hood and they would find out who they were in their past lives. And because all of the followers were tricked into believing that they were like divinely chosen and that they were like really, really special, they were like all the chosen ones, de Mombro would trick them into believing that they were seeing visions or prophecies by using cheap holograms and literally smoke and mirrors. And de Mombro and Jouret convinced all of their followers that they each had a role to play in the new age or the apocalypse. When the world ended, they each had a role to play. Because of course, this is a doomsday cult. Like I always say, is your cult even a cult if you're not telling your followers that the world's gonna end soon and the only way to save themselves is to listen to everything that the cult leader says? Do you remember how I said de Mombro is the guy with all the crazy ideas? Well, he really pushed this idea that in the new age, the apocalypse, there would be cosmic children. They were special children from aliens with special powers, like superpowers, and that the cosmic children would assist the Order of the Solar Temple in the apocalypse. And of course, the first cosmic child was his own daughter. He convinced all of these influential, wealthy men to pretty much bow down to a little girl, which I'm not gonna lie is kind of cool. As a former little girl herself, I would have loved that. But he's still an evil person, so back to the weird stuff he did. He told all of his followers that his daughter was conceived cosmically with the help of a spirit, and that she was to be called the Cosmic Christ Messiah child. It really is shocking that all of these elite, influential people really believed all of this stuff, but they really, really did believe it. But like what happens in most cults, the less loyal followers started to ask questions, and de Mombro was starting to feel the pressure to try and hold on to all of his power, so he decided that he didn't want to be the enemy, so he needed another enemy to point to. And he decided to blame a baby. 2 members of his cult named Tony and Susan had just welcomed a little baby boy named Christopher into the world. And Joseph de Mombro started filling all of his followers' heads with lies, claiming that this little infant boy Christopher was the Antichrist. He was evil and he was sent here to destroy the world. This was also around the time of the Waco tragedy. I might make a video on that, so let me know. But this was a cult that ended in 86 members being being killed by their cult leader. And DeMambro and DeRay were apparently really upset that they didn't think of this first. And they were actually quoted saying that they were going to do something more spectacular than Waco. So they convinced all of their followers that the world was about to end because of this evil baby, so they all had to prepare for transit. And transit meant that they all had to die, and then aliens would come and bring them to another alien planet in a spaceship. And then on October 4th, 1994, police were called to a house fire in Quebec, Canada. After they put out the fire, they found the bodies of 4 murdered the Order of Solar Temple members and a baby. 5 people had been murdered in this home before it was lit on fire, and this included Tony, Susan, and their infant son, Christopher, that Joseph DeBrambro convinced everyone was the devil reincarnated. And on that exact same day in Switzerland, police were called to 2 more house fires where they found an additional 48 members of the Order of Solar Temple cult that were all dead, which included Joseph DeMambro and Luke Dre. The members had all been either poisoned, shot, or stabbed to death. And there were messages left behind that everyone was given a choice, but if they refused transit, they were just murdered anyways, and this is likely what happened to Tony, Susan, and their infant son. The messages also stated that there were more waves of transits planned, and in the following 3 years, even though their members were dead, an additional 21, the Order of Solar Temple members, also ended their own lives or were murdered, making the grand total of victims of the Order of the Solar Temple cult 74 people, which included multiple children. This was a weird one. Definitely really, really sick and twisted. I'm really interested to hear all of your guys' thoughts, opinions, and questions in the comments. While you're there, please always remember to be respectful. And while you're in the comments, please let me know what case you want to see me covering next. Been really covering a lot of cults lately. Let me know if there's another cult you want to see me cover. And thank you to everyone that suggested that we covered this case. And I will see you guys all next time in my next video. Please be a good person to your fellow person.
Have you ever even stopped to wonder for a minute what your neighbour is hiding behind their garage door? It was October 2014 in San Diego, and Elizabeth Sullivan was looking forward to a fresh start. Bless her, she'd been through absolute hell. She'd really settled, to be honest, with this guy called Matthew Sullivan, and he just never treated her right from day one. They got married, they had kids, they did all the things that she thought should bring her happiness, and yet still, she was miserable. And when she decided to end her marriage once and for all, she knew one thing. Her little girls needed their mum. She knew her partner, Matthew, was an aggressive, violent man. He'd literally been physically abusive to her. So she fought for custody of her little girls. But it seemed like there was light at the end of the tunnel. After all of this stress, all of this anguish, and obviously the financial toll that divorce takes as well, the pair were still living together, but in separate rooms, and Elizabeth met somebody else online. It was like, finally, a nice person that I can kind of share my pain with, talk to about this divorce, and now I can finally move on with my life. So it was really weird when she just suddenly didn't show up to a meeting with her lawyer. She always went to those meetings with her lawyer. She wanted this divorce done. So why wasn't she answering her phone? Her friend Nathan rang police like, "This is totally unusual, can you do a welfare check?" So police headed straight over to her house and found her car in the driveway. So they're like, well, she can't have gone far. And Matthew was there and he was saying, I haven't heard from her either. He seemed really, really upset. He was like, the girls need their mum. Her entire family was totally devastated by this. They had like a couple of leads, but nothing concrete, and everything seemed to go to dead ends. They had to carry on their life for years. It was like 2 years that they just couldn't grieve, couldn't properly move on, but still had to go to work, get up and do normal things. Until October 2016. In San Diego Bay, somebody spotted a body floating. It was Elizabeth. The autopsy was just harrowing. This had clearly been no accident and no self-unaliving either. She had a broken jaw, a broken nose, and over 5 stab wounds. The chilling part is she hadn't been in the water long, so like, how did she get there and where had she been? You might be thinking now, well, what's Matthew up to? How's he taking the news? Well, he was at home when he got the call with his new fiancée and baby. It clearly didn't take him long to move on. And guess what he was doing? He was in the middle of moving house. He was just about to up and leave with his new fiancée, new baby, to go to live in Wyoming, Delaware. And police were like, wait a damn minute. They searched his house again and finally they found something. And why this wasn't found initially, I really have no idea. A bloodied knife was in the attic and blood under the carpet in the bedroom. Like, imagine being that new fiancé and suddenly realizing that this guy is an absolute monster. Investigators also found that Matthew had likely stored Elizabeth's body in a freezer in the garage. He'd found out that she was seeing this new guy and he hated it. He couldn't stand her moving on. He didn't have control of her anymore. He tried to make out like she just abandoned her two girls. He was going, yeah, I can't believe she's done this. Like, she's never done anything like this before. Well, she didn't do it, Matthew. You did. He never showed any remorse, and turns out the little girls were in the next room when he murdered their mum. And even more vile is the fact that he was given just 16 years in prison. Like, how is that justice? For more cases like this, I post a brand new episode on my podcast, The Born Investigation, every single week.
This woman killed both of her parents and then lived in the same house with their bodies for years. John and Lois McCulloch were an elderly couple. They were both in their 70s living in the UK. They both had ongoing health problems, so they needed a little bit of extra help and care. So their 30-year-old daughter, Virginia, was living with them. Virginia would help with their medication, prepare some of their meals. She was handling their finances. But the problem was Virginia was a compulsive liar and a thief. Virginia was unemployed, but she would tell her parents that she had a job. Her parents thought that she had this whole life, when in reality, she had no friends and no hobbies. Virginia even faked a pregnancy. She bought this whole baby bump and then faked losing her baby when she couldn't keep up with the lie anymore. Virginia was also stealing all of her parents' money. She was taking all these credit cards out in their names and then building all this credit card debt in her parents' names. But when her parents found out that they were missing thousands of dollars, well, actually pounds, not dollars, because this is in the UK, and they also had all of this credit card debt, Virginia had to lie her way out of it. Virginia told her parents that hackers and scammers stole all of their money, but the police were already working on getting them their money back. Virginia even showed her parents fake documents from the police and even got on the phone with her parents and pretended to be a police officer, telling them about the ongoing investigation. But the funny thing about being a compulsive liar like Virginia is when you tell a lie, then you need to come up with new lies to cover up the first lies and so on and so forth. And the truth will always come out because Virginia knew that her parents weren't going to get their money back. She was still spending it all away and making new credit card debt and gambling their money away. She didn't have a job to pay them back. She had created this web of lies and felt that the only way out of it was murder. For months, Virginia planned how she was going to kill her parents, her elderly parents that trusted her to take care of them. And then on the evening of June 17th, 2019, Virginia dosed her parents like evening drinks with a large amount of prescription medication and then helped them to bed. The next morning, Virginia found her father, John, already gone, but her mother, Lois, was still very much alive. So Virginia decides to brutally end her mother's life. She gets a hammer, she strikes her mom in the head with it multiple times. She gets a sharp weapon, uses that on her mother multiple times, and her mother's looking her in the eyes, looking her daughter in the eyes and asking her, "What are you doing?" And after killing both of her parents, Virginia went online shopping with her parents' credit cards. Virginia ended up making these makeshift tombs in her house to hide her parents' bodies. She put both of her parents' bodies in sleeping bags and then put her father's body in his office and surrounded it by concrete blocks. And then she put her mother's body inside a wardrobe in a spare bedroom and then also covered up the door with concrete blocks. And then Virginia just lived life as normal, living in the same house alongside her parents' bodies for 4 years. Virginia would always have a lie, an excuse why her parents weren't around anymore, and honestly, both of her parents, John and Lois, were pretty shy, introverted people. Her mother had social anxiety, so it was normal for them not to be like out and about, but Virginia had 4 older sisters. So she would have to lie to them about why they couldn't come to visit or why her parents weren't coming to visit their grandchildren anymore. Virginia would literally get on the phone with her sisters pretending to be her mom. And then only a handful of months after killing both of her parents, the 2020 lockdown started, and Virginia was probably one of the only people that were happy about the 2020 lockdowns because now she had the perfect excuse why her elderly parents weren't around and why people hadn't seen them in a while. And after a while, Virginia really started to rub people the wrong way. She was acting really erratic and paranoid in public. She was saying the weirdest things to strangers. Like she would tell people that spies were hacking her Wi-Fi. And then she told a stranger at the grocery store that the police were after her because they think that she killed her parents. Which isn't even true because at this point, the police weren't even suspicious of Virginia yet, even though they should have been. Because despite hiding 2 bodies that she killed in her house, Virginia couldn't stop calling the police. And it would be for the most trivial things too, like someone was being too loud or she saw someone littering. She was calling the police so often, she even eventually started calling the police pretending to be her mom. During the time frame that Virginia was hiding her parents' bodies, she called the police 238 times. And it's like, why? Was she trying to get caught? But she was still doing things to like cover her tracks and make it seem like her parents were still alive. They both had these ongoing health problems, so Virginia would like make doctor's appointments under their names, but of course they would never show up for any of these appointments. And after 4 years of this, the doctors got really suspicious and it was enough for them to contact the police. There's actually full body cam footage of the police going to Virginia's house to like talk to her and then arrest her. And she's so calm in it. She makes a full confession. It's so bizarre because she's so calm. One of the officers asked Virginia if there's anything in the house that they should know about. And I'm assuming that they're not talking about bodies, like they're talking about if she has any weapons in the house. But Virginia just calmly says, yeah, there's something here. I'm gonna take you to it. And then she like shows them her father's body.
Is there anything in the pocket we should know about?
Yes, there is. Can I take you to it?
No, you can tell me.
Can we go in there for a second, just so I can tell you something about what's in there?
Yeah.
And the only reason I said I need to tell you something about what's upstairs on the top floor as well.
It's fine.
My dad's body's in there.
Right, okay.
And after
Okay.
finding his body, the officers are obviously like shocked and disgusted. And Virginia just cheerfully tells the police officers to cheer up because at least they caught the bad guy.
Yeah, well, at least you caught the bad guy.
There was no trial because Virginia pled guilty on all charges, and just last month on October 11th, 2024, Virginia was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum sentence of 36 years. But there's still so many questions in this case because why? Why did Virginia do it? Was it really just because she was afraid that her parents were going to find out that she was stealing from them? I mean, worst case scenario, if they did, she went to prison for a couple years. I mean, look at her now. She's in prison for the rest of her life, and even if she does get out in 36 years, she's going to be in her 60s, 70s. Virginia stole her parents' lives, but she also stole parents from her 4 sisters, and her sisters had children, so she also stole people's grandparents from them. And Virginia has tried to explain her actions a little bit by, accusing her parents of horrific abuse, but all 4 of her sisters say that her accusations are disgusting lies. Virginia's a compulsive liar, and their parents, might have been older from a different time period and show affection and love in different ways, but they were still really loving, caring, and thoughtful people, and John and Lois did not deserve what happened to them. If you watched in this video, thank you so much. Please let me know all your thoughts, theories, and opinions in the comment section, and while you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. I love you guys so much, and I'll see you guys tomorrow with another video.
What is one unsolved murder case that is just next level horrifying and bone chilling to you? I'll go first. Mine is the mysterious death of Nora Fuller. She was a 16-year-old girl who responded to a newspaper ad for a nanny job that she desperately wanted. The man who placed this ad is only known as John Bennett, and so she meets this man at what he said was his house. But this address actually just led back to a vacant lot. No house ever existed there. Her body would eventually be found in an abandoned building that was mysteriously rented a few days prior to her going missing. The house only contained 1 cheap bed and 1 chair, which was also rented right before she disappeared, all presumably by this same man. Not a lot about this case is known, but what details we do have are so disturbing that they will keep you up at night. So let's talk about it. This is 16-year-old Nora Fuller. In 1902, she lived with her mom and younger siblings in San Francisco, California. The entire past year had not been great to the Fuller family, as Nora's mom had left her second husband. This left the family family with no stable source of income, and some of that financial responsibility ultimately fell on Nora, who was taken out of school to go and find a job. Finding a job didn't take long for her though, because in early January of 1902, Nora found an ad in the newspaper for a nanny position. It was placed by a man named John Bennett, and he was looking for a nanny for his baby. So on January 11th, 1902, Nora reached out to him, and John Bennett asked her to meet him at this local restaurant called the Popular Restaurant. Nora left her home that evening really excited to finally have some full-time work, but little did anyone know that this would be the very last time that she would ever be seen alive. A few hours go by, and Nora actually called her mom to tell her that the interview went great and that John Bennett wanted her to start right away. So instead of going to the restaurant, she was actually at his home. Nora told her mom the address, which was 1500 Geary Street. Her mom felt really off about this whole situation. She told Nora to just come home and that she could start at a later date, which annoyed Nora. Ultimately though, Nora agreed and told her mom that she was on her way home, but hours came and went and she never showed up. Not long after, her mom reported her missing and gave the police the address to John Bennett's house. But when police showed up to check on them, what they found was shocking, because sitting at 1500 Geary Street was literally just a vacant lot. There was no house there. So this was an immediate red flag to Nora's mom, but sadly, the police didn't really take this case seriously at first. They did a light search for her, but I guess one of Nora's friends had recently run away. So they told Nora's family and the public that Nora must have just ran away too. Meanwhile, her mom was saying no, Nora would never do that, and she was more than likely kidnapped by this John Bennett guy. So a month goes by with radio silence from Nora. Police eventually went to the Popular Restaurant and spoke with the owner, since Nora was supposed to have gone there the night she disappeared. The owner told them some pretty disturbing things though. He said that there was a man there that night that was waiting for a young girl, presumably Nora. But this wasn't just some random man. The man who police suspect was John Bennett was actually a regular at this restaurant, and he had been for the past 15 years. They didn't know his real name. They only ever called him Tenderloin because he was obsessed with steak tenderloins and would always order that. But the owner said that he talked to this regular at around 5:30 that night, and the man told them that he was expecting a young girl, so if she showed up, to send her to his table. The girl never showed up though, which made this man super irritable to where he was pacing up and down the sidewalk until he eventually left. What set off alarm bells though was that since this man had been coming to this restaurant for the past 15 years, the staff there knew him pretty well, and one thing was for sure: he had no wife and no kids, and he would sometimes pretend to be a minister. The owner said that he knows that this man had no good intentions with Nora had they actually met up. Because they physically saw this man, they were able to give police a description of a possible suspect. He was around 40 years old, 5'9", weighed about 170 pounds, was very well dressed, and had a brown mustache. So although this was super helpful, Nora was still nowhere to be found, and this is when authorities started taking the case a bit more seriously. Nothing would really happen though for another month. So on February 8th, 1902, the landlord for 2211 Sutter Street had sent police to the house to conduct a welfare check. The house had been rented 3 days before Nora's disappearance by a man who said his name was C.B. Hawkins. He wanted to rent 2211 Sutter Street, but he told the landlord that he had no references to give because he was from out of town. But the man was dressed extremely well, and he offered to pay the entire first month's rent up front. So the landlord agreed and gave him the keys to the house. On the contract, he again signed his name as C.B. Hawkins. So bringing it back to February 8th, it was now a new month, yet Mr. C.B. Hawkins had not paid the rent, and when the landlord went to knock on the door, he wasn't getting any answers. So he decided to send the police as something just felt off. And when authorities entered the house, they found a really eerie scene. It was like the house had sat untouched for a really long time. Dust and cobwebs were everywhere, and there was almost no furniture in the house, except for the bedroom. There was no source of heat or light, as the gas was never connected, and there was no food in the house either. So as police made their way to the bedroom, they saw a girl lying on the bed under a bunch of blankets. And at first, it looked like she was sleeping, but as they peeled back the blankets, they found that this was actually Nora Fuller, and she was deceased. She'd been covered up to her neck in quilts, and the bed she was laying on was really small and cheap. Other than that, there was only one chair in the entire house, which was positioned to look at the bed. Lying on the bedroom floor was Nora's purse and her clothes, and a lot of letters addressed to a Mrs. C.B. Hawkins at 2211 Sutter Street. It was clear that Nora had been dead for some time before being found, and she was completely nude. Authorities found 2 black black marks on her throat, one on each side of her larynx, and her cause of death was ruled as strangulation. Afterwards, she'd been horrifically assaulted, her body badly mutilated. The medical examiner said that it was clear just by looking at her that she had been unmistakably violated. No drugs were found in her system, although it could have been possible that she ingested some alcohol before death, and she was found to have eaten an apple about 2 hours before she died. What's really sad is that Nora's little brother was brought in to identify her, which he did, but he said that Nora had her unmistakable ribbon tied around her neck, which he fastened for her on the day she went missing. So now that it was very clear that this was not a runaway case, police started processing the scene and trying to track down John Bennett, or this C.B. Hawkins guy. They started with the mail that was all over the floor in the abandoned house. All of it was junk mail except for one circular letter addressed to Mrs. C.B. Hawkins. It was postmarked 10 days after Nora went missing, yet it was opened and put inside of Nora's jacket. There were also torn pieces of the Denver Post all over the bedroom floor, dated 2 days before Nora disappeared. There was also an empty bottle of whiskey and the butt end of a cigar, and I'm not sure if this is because this happened in 1902, but no DNA was able to be taken from either of those items. Authorities started asking the public for help, which actually provided some helpful information. So the owner of a local furniture store nearby came forward and said that he actually met C.B. Hawkins, and he fulfilled an unusual request for him. C.B. was dressed super well in expensive clothing, which stood out to the store owner. He asked the owner for the cheapest bed he had and a plain chair, along with some quilts. The same quilts that Nora would later be found wrapped up in up to her neck. C.B. demanded that this be delivered that night or not at all, which they agreed to. And again, he signed the furniture order as C.B. Hawkins, just like the lease agreement at 2211 Sutter Street. This all happened on January 9th, 1902, so 2 days before Nora disappeared. So that night, a young delivery boy from the furniture store showed up to 2211 Sutter Street, as per his specific request. The house was really dark as CB never had the power turned on. This made the delivery a little bit difficult, so he asked CB if he could turn the lights on, which kind of spooked him a little bit. CB instead said to just leave the furniture outside and he would bring it in himself, which was weird, but that's what he did. Now that authorities had some sort of written trail for this guy, they decided to compare the handwriting from not just the furniture store and the lease contract, but also to the nanny ad posted in the newspaper, which Nora responded to, and it came back that all 3 signatures were a match. So not only was C.B. Hawkins a fake name, but so was John Bennett, and in reality, they were the same person. So because of this, authorities thought that it wouldn't be long until they would track this guy down, but that was not the case. Whoever killed Nora has never been found, and to this day, her murder remains unsolved. And although we don't know what happened to her or who was responsible, there are a few theories and suspects. So theory number 1 was that Nora possibly knew her killer, and this was backed up by one of her closest friends, Madge. Madge insisted that Nora's killer was this rich older man named Bennett who Nora had secretly been dating. I guess Nora had recently been sneaking out and going to hang out with this man behind her mom's back, so it was very secretive and no one really knew. Madge said that Nora really seemed to like Bennett a lot, and she thinks that the ad in the newspaper was actually just a trick to be able to sneak out and go see him. Her reasoning was that the ad specifically asked for a white nanny, which was odd and didn't need to be said. So either this ad was placed by an outsider not from California, or it was like a secret code for Nora by this John Bennett guy. Some people agree with this theory because of the way Nora was found. She was found wrapped up in quilts and tucked into the bed like she was sleeping, not just dumped somewhere. Maybe her killer felt bad and had some remorse after the fact. One thing was super clear though, and that was that the Sutter Street house had been clearly rented and staged for her murder. The killer very meticulously planned every single detail of Nora's murder, which is terrifying. Theory number 2 is that Nora didn't know her killer and that the ad in the newspaper was a ruse to lure a young girl to her death. The only suspect that police ever had was a local man named Charles B. Hadley. Charles was an accountant for the San Francisco Examiner, and he apparently lived with his girlfriend in town. When police went to his house, Charles was nowhere to be found, but his girlfriend was there, and she told authorities that Charles had actually disappeared the morning Nora's body was found. She said it was really weird because every morning Charles would go into the bathroom and read a newspaper on the toilet. The morning that Nora's body was found, Charles had just up and vanished. But when his girlfriend checked the bathroom, in the toilet was his newspaper, and in that newspaper was an article about Nora's disappearance. She thinks that he was probably responsible somehow and just freaked out and took off. She thinks he was involved because shortly after Nora disappeared, she was doing Charles's laundry and found blood all over his clothes. At that point, she didn't know where the blood came from or anything about Nora at all, so she burned all the clothes. And the one one final piece of evidence that kind of puts the nail in the coffin is what Charles used to obsessively eat. Any guesses? Steak tenderloin, just like the regular at the restaurant. His girlfriend gave police a photo of Charles B. Hadley, and usually he was clean shaven. But his girlfriend said that in the days before all of this happened, he bought a fake brown mustache and would wear it all over town. So police took this photo and altered it to have a brown mustache, and then they showed it to everyone this mysterious man interacted with. So the restaurant owner, the landlord for 2211 Sutter Street, and the furniture store owner and the delivery boy. And shockingly, they all agreed that this was the mystery man. Either John Bennett or C.B. Hawkins, whatever fake name he gave, this was all the same man. I guess it sort of makes sense if his name was Charles B. Hadley to go by C.B. Hawkins. But police began digging into Charles's past, and they found that he had family in Chicago, but also that Charles B. Hadley wasn't even his real name. His name was actually Charlie Start, and Charlie was known to have weird interactions in his past with other 16-year-old girls just like Nora. His face was blasted everywhere, and police began another massive manhunt for him. But to this day, he has never been found. So he's never been charged, but to a lot of people, and honestly myself included, it really seems like he was responsible for this crime. Some think that he ran off and lived out the rest of his life under a new identity, while others think that he killed himself not long after being discovered. Either way, he was never found, and it's now been 123 years. Yet whatever really happened to Nora that night and why remains a mystery.
This is the story of the most horrifying crime in Japanese history. Junko Furuta was born on January 18, 1971 in Tokyo, Japan. She was a middle child. She had an older and a younger brother. In 1988, she was a senior and 17 years old, working a part-time job at a plastic molding company. She was saving up money for a graduation trip that her class had planned. Junko had already accepted a job at an electronic company that she was set to start after she graduated. She was well liked by her teachers and her classmates. They spoke highly of her. Her grades stayed high and she barely missed school. So what happened to her literally made me sick to my stomach. On the evening of November 25th, 1988, 18-year-old Hiroshi and 16-year-old Minato were on their motorcycles looking for a young lady to rape and rob. That's when they seen Junko leaving her part-time job heading home. Now, Junko was not a stranger to Hiroshi because in school, Hiroshi tried to holler at Junko, and Junko was not feeling him like that. She turned him down. Hiroshi was still salty about that, so when he seen Junko, he instructed Minato to knock her off her bike. Now, when he knocked Junko off her bike, Hiroshi comes out of nowhere acting like a superhero, like he's about to save the day. He picked Junko off the ground and said, "I'll walk you home." As he was gaining Junko's trust, he was guiding her to an abandoned warehouse. When they got to that abandoned warehouse, he had told her he was a part of a gang, and if she didn't cooperate, he would kill her. He raped her in that abandoned warehouse. Then he took her to a hotel and raped her again. He then called Minato and bragged about what he did. Now, Minato was with Joe and Yasushi, and they told Hiroshi, "Do not let her go because we won't end on this too." And Hiroshi said, "Well, meet us in the park tomorrow morning." In the early morning of November 26th, the group met up in the park. Now they're trying to figure out what to do with Junko, and they decided to take her to Minato's house because his parents were more lenient than everybody else's parents. Once they got to Minato's home, they took Junko to the second floor and confined her to a bedroom. They had gang raped her this entire day. The next day, Junko's parents filed a missing persons report. And when the group seen that, they made Junko call her parents and tell them that she had ran away and that she's okay. Minato had told his parents that Junko was his girlfriend, and when he seen that they believed him, that gave him the green light. That very next night on November 28th, he and Hiroshi and the rest of the group had invited more teenage boys to come and gang rape her. In early December, Junko tried to escape by calling the police, but she couldn't get a word out because one of the boys ended up walking in and snatching the phone out of her hand. They beat her until her face was bloody. Now, around this time, Minato's parents is noticing that, she's probably being held captive, but they still didn't do anything. Another group of boys came over to gang rape Junko, and one of the boys was not feeling it. So he left and decided to call the police. Now, when the police got to Manato's house, Manato's parents said, I don't know what you're talking about. There's no girl here. And the police did not investigate further. About 20 days into her captivity, Junko is begging the boys, go ahead and kill me. Go ahead and put me out of my misery because I'm tired. At this point, she had been gang raped well over 200 times. She had been beaten with an iron rod. They had hung her from a ceiling and used her as a punching bag. She was forced to drink her own urine and eat cockroaches. By the end of December, Junko was very malnourished. She could barely walk. She couldn't use the bathroom properly because they was constantly sticking random objects up her vagina and her backside. Her face was disfigured. She had wounds so bad that it was causing like a foul odor through the house. On June 4th, 1989, Hiroshi had lost money gambling. He decided to take his anger out on Junko. He had lit a candle and let the wax fall on her face. He then told her to drink her own urine while she stood up. He then kicked her and she fell onto a stereo and immediately started having a seizure. The group decided to beat her while she's having this seizure. They then took an iron exercise ball and dropped it on Junko's abdomen several times. They then poured lighter fluid on her and set her on fire. Now, setting her on fire was something that they did often. They set her genitals on fire. They set her ankles on fire. So they're thinking she's just going to recover like she always does. This assault lasted 2 hours. When the group was done, they noticed that Junko wasn't moving. She wasn't getting up. The group decided to kick her to try to wake her up, but Junko was dead. She was held captive for 44 days. Less than 24 hours after her death, the group wrapped Junko up in a blanket, stuffed her in a large duffel bag, and stuffed the duffel bag in a 55-pound drum. They then filled that drum up with wet cement. At around 8 p.m. on January 5th, the group found a vacant lot near a construction site and they dumped the drum there. It wasn't until the end of March when Hiroshi and Joe got arrested for a gang rape reported by a 19-year-old young lady that happened in December of 1988. Now, in the interrogation room, Hiroshi thought Joe had confessed to the murder of Junko. Whole time, the police didn't even know Junko was missing. So Hiroshi done confessed to a crime that the police knew nothing about. Junko's body was found March 29th, 1989. All the boys pled guilty, but they were minors in Japan. Even though Hiroshi was 18 years old, that's still considered a minor over there. Joe, 17. Yasushi, he was 17 as well. In July of 1990, Hiroshi, who was considered the ringleader, was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He had got out in 2009 and changed his name. His parents sold their house. They had gave Junko's parents $350,000. He has been in and out of prison. I think he went back to jail in 2013 and he was still living with his mama. He been going through it. Joe ended up getting 10 years. He was released in 1999. When he got out, he ended up getting an IT job, but then they fired his ass because they found out who he was. In 2004, he got arrested again because he put a man in his trunk and held him captive for 4 hours because he thought he was messing with his girlfriend. He got released in 2009. In 2022, while on his psych meds, he passed out and got his head stuck between the toilet and the sink and ended up choking on his own vomit. He died. That's a crazy way to go out, boy. Minato was sentenced to 9 years. His parents was not charged. He was released in 1998. He moved back in with his mother. In 2018, he was still unemployed. They arrested his ass again on suspicion of murder. He had slashed some man in the neck. Wow. Yasushi was sentenced to 7 years. He was released in 1996, moved back in with his mother. By 2005, he had developed some type of disease and he didn't have the money to treat it. By 2021, he was dead. I didn't even know shit like this even happened over there in Japan. I didn't even say everything. They ripped off her nipples with pliers. They placed her in a freezer. They made her sleep outside. This was some sick shit. Rest in peace to Junko, man, because my God.
I just want to give you a real representation of what I looked like when I was researching this. I was like, type. What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean the case was closed? Like, to this day, this case remains one of the craziest unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. Okay, so 1959, in the deep Ural Mountains of Russia, 9 experienced hikers led by a 23-year-old named Igor Dyatlov all set out on what was supposed to be a challenging but possible 190-mile hike. They never came back. The mountains are in the northern part of the Soviet Union, and the group wanted to complete this specific hike in order to get their grade 3 hiking certification, which was the highest level available at that time. They started the hike on January 25th, and they were planning on returning home on or before February 12th. So they were estimating that the hike was going to take them 16 to 18 days to complete. And again, these people were experienced, equipped, they were confident, and they were excited. They head off, they eventually reach a mountain pass. They decided to stop and set up camp for the night before waking up the next morning, crossing the mountain pass, and then setting up camp on the opposite side of the mountain for the next night. So they wake up the next morning, they start to get moving through the pass, but then the weather starts to get really bad and it's only getting worse. It's a really bad snowstorm with heavy winds and it's decreasing their visibility and they lose their direction, and now they have completely gone off of their path. They realize they're gonna have to wait it out, but instead of going back to a safe area, for some reason, even though they're experienced and they should know better, instead of going back to the area where they would be sheltered from the weather, the group decides to set up camp on the slope of the mountain, one of the most dangerous areas you could be. The following day, they're supposed to be meeting another group of people at some sort of checkpoint, but they don't show up, and the people overseeing this entire hike are made aware of it. However, it's a group of 9 people, all of which are experienced and should be knowledgeable enough to know how to survive the weather conditions that were on these mountains. So it's not a huge concern right off the bat, but then 3 weeks pass and there's no sign whatsoever of this group, so a search party is sent out. The army, helicopters, trained rescuers, they all go out to search the mountains. And sooner than later, they run into the tent of where the group had last been, on the slope of that mountain, and they think it's really strange because setting up camp there was so risky for so many reasons. The wind could have blown them right off, snow could have fallen on top of their tent, so many things, and they're surprised to see that that is where the group had decided to stay. But that was not the most concerning part. They walk up to the tent, the hikers are not there, but inside there are neatly folded stacks of their clothing. The tent itself was cut open from the inside, their belongings were left behind as well as their shoes, meaning that the hikers had fled into the freezing cold in freezing temperatures like below 50 degrees freezing weather, half dressed, barefoot, either wearing no shoes at all or only one. And then they see footprints by the tent leading down to some trees. And by the way that the tent was cut open, they were thinking, oh, it looks like they fled in some sort of panic. They must have left quickly. But by the way their footprints were placed, that suggested that they were walking calmly, not running, not speed walking, just walking slowly. They follow the footsteps down to the forest area until they get to some trees, and there they find 2 bodies. As they're approaching the trees, they see a flat area that had remains of a fire, like someone started a fire, and next to it they saw the first body of one of the hikers. Without his clothing, only with socks on, and with his hand burned. Next to him was the second body, also deceased, and that hiker only had one shoe on. I believe one of his socks was also found right by the fire. Both of them had noticeable scrapes on their hands. Then they noticed these deep scratch marks on the tree, like deep scratch marks, and also broken tree branches, so it almost looked like someone had tried to climb up on the tree. And over the next few days, the searchers found 3 more bodies, also deceased in similar conditions, frozen in the snow around cedar trees. But by the way their bodies were positioned, it looked almost as if they were trying to crawl back to camp, back to their tent. Those 3 were also not wearing much, but what they were wearing belonged to the other 2 hikers. Like, they all mixed and matched their clothes, and they were all wearing pieces of each other's. It was concluded that they all passed away from hypothermia. The last 4 bodies took them months to find. They wouldn't be able to find them until the snow started to melt in May, and they were found at the bottom of a ravine deep in the woods under
under 13 feet of melting snow, and their bodies seemed to be in even stranger conditions than the others. 3 out of the 4 were dressed better than the others. One of them, the girl, had her left foot and shin wrapped in a torn jacket, and they had traumatic injuries. But the weirdest part about it is that the injuries were mostly internal, aka the injuries appeared to be caused by some sort of blunt force trauma, but there was nothing around them that could have been used to inflict those kind of injuries. It was determined that they likely fell, but medical examiners determined that prior to falling, 3 out of the 4 had sustained blunt force trauma similar to injuries suffered from a car crash. One of them had a partially crushed skull. 2 others had multiple broken ribs to the point that their chests looked to be caved in. And listen to this. The female hiker was found with no tongue, no eyeballs, part of her lip was missing, she had facial tissue that was missing, and part of her skull had been removed. Some of the bodies also had traces of radiation on their clothing. So the Soviet government launches an investigation. During their investigation, they realized that there was a big Russian military exercise taking place on those same mountains, miles away, but on the same mountains at the same time that the hikers would have been hiking. And one of the members in the military said that one night he noticed very weird lights in the sky over the mountains in the exact spot where the hikers would have been the same night that they are believed to have passed. And then the Soviet government closes the investigation, and in 1959 it's concluded that all 9 hikers passed away due to, quote, a compelling natural force. And that was that. Case closed. Years later, Russia reopened the case and concluded that it was caused by an avalanche, but to this day, a lot of people don't buy it. I don't know. Honestly, I'm not very big into conspiracy theories. I just much prefer to go off of facts because honestly, I don't have enough room in my mind to believe all these conspiracy theories. I would literally go mental, but I cannot lie, I do fall into rabbit holes like this one. And this one made me feel so uneasy. Them saying that the reason they passed away was due to a compelling natural force. What do you actually mean? What do you actually mean? I don't know, I'm like spooked out. I had to come on here and share because I can't wait to read this comment section because literally what? Anyway, that's all for me today. Let me know your thoughts. Hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you. Also, new podcast episode coming out today on the O.J. Simpson case, so go watch that. Love you.
This Playboy bunny was murdered in her London flat in what detectives described as one of the most violent and brutal crime scenes that they had ever worked on. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Eve Stratford. Eve Stratford was born in Dortmund, West Germany on the 28th of December 1953. Eventually, her and her family settled in the UK, and by 1973, she was living in a flat in Leighton, London with her rockstar boyfriend, Tony Priest. Eve was described as a very friendly, bubbly, girly girl. She was really sweet, she was very smart, she could speak multiple languages, and she was very soft-hearted. Her dream in life was to become a famous model, and Eve was so beautiful that this was something that was well within her reach. She managed to get a job in the very prestigious Playboy Club in London. Here she would serve drinks, she would chat with patrons, all while wearing the absolutely iconic Playboy bunny outfits. Tails, ears, heels, the lot. Eve absolutely loved this job, and she got along with all of the other women working there. In March of 1975, however, Eve was suspended from this job after her manager discovered that she had posed nude on the front of a competitor's magazine. She was Mayfair magazine's Girl of the Month. This suspension would have been something that absolutely devastated Eve. On the 18th of March 1975, Tony Priest left the Leighton flat early in the morning for a day at work, leaving 22-year-old Eve behind. That day she would trek right over to Camden, where she met with her agent, and then following that she went to the Bayswater area, and this is where she met up with a promotions consultant. Following this, she was spotted heading towards the direction of her home at about 3:30 p.m. She was clutching a bouquet of dried flowers, and this was the final confirmed sighting of Eve Stratford alive. When Tony arrived back home at around about 5:20 p.m, he opened up the door and announced that he was home, only to be met with silence. He walked up the stairs and made his way to the couple's bedroom, and that is when he found Eve. She was laid face down on the floor, partially dressed in only a matching set of underwear and a negligee which was open at the front. Her hands were bound behind her back with a scarf, and there had been an attempt to bind her legs. There was a nylon stocking wrapped around one of her ankles. Horrifyingly, Eve Stratford had her throat slit between 8 to 12 times with so much force and ferocity and violence that she was almost decapitated. It was also later confirmed that she was sexually assaulted, the killer leaving behind a DNA sample. Detectives immediately got to work. They would say that this was one of the most graphic, brutal, violent, horrifying crimes that they had ever worked on, and this man was still on the street and they needed to find him and needed to apprehend him before he could do this again. They would have no idea that they would be too late. Detectives learned that in the days leading up to and on the day of her murder, Eve had been receiving really strange, eerie phone calls. Someone would ring her phone and she would answer saying, "Hello?" But then on the other end, there would just be silence. There was no sign of forced entry into the flat. However, there was evidence that made the detectives believe that Eve was intercepted as soon as she walked into her home. She had been caught off guard by her killer, who likely was laying in wait, ready to ambush her as soon as she walked through the door. Eve's downstairs neighbour was home the entire time. She told the detectives that she didn't really hear anything. At one point, she heard Eve talking to a man, but she couldn't really hear or wasn't really listening to what they were saying because it wasn't as if they were shouting and they were screaming. It was just like a normal general conversation. Following this, she heard a single thud followed by footsteps and then silence. That was about an hour before Tony arrived home. He would be ruled out as a suspect, and the detectives began going through every single avenue that they could. They extensively looked into a man named Abdul, who was a regular at the Playboy Club. But he too would eventually be ruled out. They started to wonder if maybe Eve had a stalker, maybe someone else from the Playboy Club, or maybe someone who had saw her Mayfair magazine cover and wanted her all to themselves. Detectives would take over 400 statements, they fingerprinted over 250 people, but no matter what they did and what tip they followed, they got no closer to identifying Eve's killer. Back then, even with the DNA sample, there wasn't a lot that they were able to do with it. And so, her case began to go cold. It wouldn't be until 30 years later that something happened that blew open the case. They had finally got a match to the DNA sample, but it wasn't a match to a person. This DNA sample matched another DNA sample that was found at another crime scene. The same man who brutally murdered Eve Stratford inside of her home murdered 16-year-old Lynn Whedon only 6 months later. And it took 30 years for DNA to link these two cases. Many people who are familiar with this case don't think that the killer stopped at just Eve and Lynn, that he went on killing. There are at least 3 other murders of women and girls in London who could be connected to these cases. The case of those 3 women I am going to be featuring on this Friday's episode on my podcast, True Crime with Caitlin. If you're interested in hearing about the case of Eve Stratford and Lynn Whedon in its entirety, going through the girls' backgrounds, the murders, the investigations, suspects, everything and more, I have covered in a brand new podcast episode ready to listen to right now wherever you stream on the True Crime with Caitlin podcast.
I think the cases having to do with children are the saddest for me for obvious reasons, like the fact that they're the most vulnerable victims and they have no one to stand up for them. They cannot defend themselves, but also because they didn't even have a chance. They didn't even have a chance at life. They didn't get to grow up. It's terrible. That being said, we're talking about children, so if you think that listening to this is going to harm your mental health in any way, shape, or form, please skip this video. I will see you in my next one. Take care of yourselves. I mean it. I love you. In the summer of 2021 in Maryland, police pulled over a vehicle being driven by Nicole Johnson for a traffic violation. Nicole was sitting in the driver's seat of the car and she had her friend, another lady, also sitting in the front passenger seat. When they ran the information that Nicole gave them, it did not take long for them to figure out that the car was uninsured, unregistered, and had fake temporary tags on. They also quickly figured out that Nicole Johnson was driving without a license, which she confessed to. While they were working on writing out the citation, one of the officers noticed a foul odor. You can hear him in the body cam footage walk up to another police officer and say, "Hey man, walk over there by the car and see if you're smelling what I'm smelling," because it was a really strong smell. Once Nicole and her friend got out of the vehicle, Nicole walked over towards the trunk of the car, opened it, and started looking through her stuff. The trunk was full. It looked like what you would expect it to look like if someone was living out of their car. Officers started asking Nicole more questions, which is when she told them that she had been living out out of her car. She specifically said, quote, "Me and my kids is literally living in the car," end quote. And then they explained to her that she's gonna have to go to court for driving an unregistered vehicle and for not having a license. But in the middle of them explaining that to her, she says, quote, "It's cool, I won't be here tomorrow. Tonight is my last night. Watch, tomorrow y'all are gonna see me on the news," end quote. Which is quite an alarming statement to say, but she ends up walking over to the sidewalk to call a friend for a ride, and authorities call a tow truck to come and get the car. But they just cannot ignore the smell coming from the car because it's so bad and it's so strong. So Nicole is asking them if she can take her belongings out of the car before they come and tow it. They're like, yeah, okay, go ahead. She takes tightly packed trash bags out of the truck as well as a storage bin, and she sets everything in a pile on the sidewalk. Officers realize that the smell is now coming from that pile, and they ask her to open up the trash bags to figure out what the source is. And Nicole is acting so casual. She's fully cooperating, saying, yeah, I'll open the bags. I'll open them right now. I'll show you what's inside. She's messing with the bags. I assume she's trying to get them open, but then she asks one of the police officers to help her, so they walk over. They're helping her. The entire time, though, she's explaining that all she has is a bunch of dirty blankets. She's just saying, it's dirty blankets, it's dirty blankets. She says this like at least 10 times, over and over again, saying, I'll show you, all I have is dirty blankets. While another officer is shining his flashlight at the bags, he notices that there's maggots all over them, and he points this out, and Nicole says, yeah, there's bugs all over everything I've been living out of my car. She keeps ripping through bag after bag, through layers of plastic, until she eventually gets to a suitcase. When the suitcase is open, there, authorities notice what looks to be the deceased body of a little girl. The body cam footage is horrific. You can literally hear the heartbreak and the worry in every single one of the police officers' voices. One of them starts crying, he has to step away. Another one starts coughing and getting choked up because of how strong the smell is. And as soon as Nicole realizes what they're looking at, she takes off running towards the middle of the street. Luckily, officers chase her. They're able to get her down, and they put her in handcuffs and they arrest her. And now she's yelling, I didn't know they were in there. I didn't know they were in there. Mind you, at that point, officers had only found one body. But it's horrible. One of the police officers looks like he's fully about to have a panic attack because he cannot believe his eyes. And another one approaches him, trying to calm him down, saying, you have to relax. I'm here. I need you to breathe. It's okay. I'm here. I need you to breathe. Okay. And then you can hear another one say that he has a daughter who's about to turn 5 years old. And he says the little girl in the suitcase has to be a 5-year-old little girl. Both Nicole Johnson and her friend are taken to the police station for questioning, and they're separated into 2 separate rooms. Soon after, authorities realize that the friend has disabilities and she's very clearly unaware of anything that's going on. So they end up calling her mom. Her mom comes to pick her up and she is released. Back at the scene, homicide detectives show up, and when they get there, they confirm that what was found in that suitcase were human remains of a little girl. And after opening the storage bin at 4:02 in the morning, they also discovered the remains of a little boy. His body had been wrapped in plastic and placed in multiple layers of trash bags and then into that plastic bin. At the police station, Nicole keeps repeating herself over and over again, saying that she had no idea that she had bodies in her car. And anytime she would be left alone, she would start talking to herself out loud, saying things that just didn't make sense, to be honest. Eventually, they were able to figure out that the children were her 7-year-old niece, Jocelyn Johnson, and her 5-year-old nephew, Larry O'Neill. According to Nicole, she had been taking care of the kids for about 2 years because their mother, her sister, wasn't able to. However, officers later discovered that the mom had tried to get her kids back, but Nicole never showed up with them to return them, and the sister was unable to reach her after that. Police records show that the little girl had been deceased for over a year, and Nicole had been driving around with her body in the trunk for approximately 14 months. The autopsy showed that the 7-year-old little girl weighed 18 pounds and the 5-year-old little boy weighed 21 pounds. And it took a while, but eventually Nicole told the police that she had been staying with the kids at a motel in May of 2020 when the little girl was misbehaving, which is when she hurt her over and over again, causing her to fall and hit her head on the floor. According to Nicole, she never woke back up. Nicole then described to the police how she put her niece's body in a suitcase and kept her remains stored there for months. As far as Larry, the little boy, Nicole said that he had suffered an injury to his leg 2 months prior and that he said he was tired and never woke back up. She then told officers that she put Larry's body in a plastic bag to be next to his sister. I also found this quote from her sister, the mother of the children, regarding Nicole. She said, quote, I trusted her. I was mentally broken from losing the woman that raised me. I'll never get to see my kids because of a mistake I made in trusting my sister. I wish I could take it back, but I can't. This is my blood sister. She was my family. The mistake I made in trusting her will always fall on me, but I never could imagine this outcome. I just needed a mental break. I lost the woman that raised me. I was tired and depressed and down. I'm sorry, end quote. On February 10th of 2025, 33-year-old Nicole Michelle Johnson was sentenced to a life sentence with all but 50 years suspended, meaning that she is set to serve at least 50 years in prison. I don't understand what has to be wrong in your mental for you to do this, one, but two, how do you ever think that you're gonna get away with keeping bodies in your trunk? And also, what, were you just never planning to talk to your sister again? I don't know. I have so many questions. It's so sad. I honestly, when I first saw the body cam footage of this, it's so sad. So if you look up the body cam footage of this, just beware. But yeah, that is all I have for today. Thank you for spending time with me today. I hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
This is the story of Shantae Mallard. Gregory Biggs was born August 16th, 1964 in Dallas, Texas. He grew up facing challenges with mental illness that began in his teenage years, but despite his difficulties, he maintained a job. He was a self-employed bricklayer in the construction industry. He got married, but it ended in divorce, but he did gain a son out of it. Around 1999, financial setbacks struck when he loaned a girlfriend some money. This resulted in him losing his truck and his home, which led to unemployment and eventually homelessness. By 2001, at the age of 37, Gregory was living in a homeless shelter in Fort Worth for about 2 years. He would lay brick on occasion just to support himself. He would navigate through the city streets often at night because it was more quiet, more laid back. He didn't have to deal with all these people. And that's exactly what he was doing on the evening of October 25th, 2001. That same night, 25-year-old Shantae Mallard, who was a Fort Worth native, come from a stable background. Her parents were together for almost 40 years. She herself was a CNA. Her brother was a lieutenant. Shantae and her close friend T decided to step out this night. They decided to go to a nightclub called Joe's Bamboo Club. Now, while they're at this club, they was drinking a little bit. They did a little bit of marijuana. They even did a little bit of ecstasy. It is now the early morning of October 26th. Shantae is leaving the club. She's very inebriated. Got into her 97 Chevy and hit Highway 287. Walking along Highway 287 is Gregory Biggs. Shantae hit Gregory, and the impact threw him over the hood and landed him directly into the windshield. Head first, he was lodged, the upper part of his body, inside of the windshield. And she did not stop immediately and ask for any help. She stopped briefly to try to push him off of her car. When that did not work, she drove 3 miles to her house, opened her garage, drove in the garage, closed it, all while Jeffrey was still lodged in her windshield. Shantae went in the house while Gregory was still alive and conscious, stuck in this windshield. He was moaning and pleading for help. At one point, he even asked for some water. Shantae checked on him on and off, but still did nothing to help him. Instead, she called her friend T that she was just out with. T came over. She seen Gregory lodged in the windshield. She did nothing either. Gregory died several hours later from blood loss and hypothermia. They said if she would have got him medical attention 2 or 3 hours after the collision, he could have survived. The very next day on October 27th, after Gregory's body started to decompose in that hot-ass garage, Shantae decided to call her on and off again boyfriend, Cleet Jackson, to help her dispose of the body. And he agreed. He recruited one of his friends and they went over to Shantae's house. They wrapped Gregory up in a blanket and dumped him in Cobb Park. Gregory's body was discovered that same day by an off-duty firefighter. They then went back and set Shantae's car on fire to get rid of the evidence. Now, when the firefighter discovered Gregory's body, he noticed that it was covered in shard glass, which he was thinking a hit and run. And it's kind of lengthy and hard to solve hit and run crimes because it's really never no evidence or no eyewitnesses. So they really didn't have a lot to go on. The case went cold. 4 months later, Shantae is at a company party and she's laughing and joking with this lady named Miranda. And she just casually says, "Girl, I hit this white man." And Miranda is looking at her crazy, not laughing because she don't think this shit is funny. She immediately called the police and gave them that tip. They got a warrant to search Shantae's house. And what was in the garage? The motherfucking 97 Chevy. I thought y'all set it on fire, but no. They only set the seats on fire. And the burnt seats were in her backyard. Gregory's hair and blood was still in the car. His fingerprints, Shantae's fingerprints, Cleet fingerprints. What was the reason of starting a fire, and if y'all was going to keep the car? Stupid. Shantae was arrested and charged with murder on March 6, 2002, and she took everybody down with her. They called T in for questioning, and she did admit to seeing Gregory after Shantae hit him. But she said that was it. The only thing she did wrong was not call the authorities, and she did not go to jail. She was granted immunity in exchange for truthful testimony at trial. Cleet Jackson and his friend Herbert Cleveland was charged with tampering with evidence, and they both agreed to testify against Shantae. Everybody pled guilty but Shantae. Shantae said the only thing she's guilty of was tampering with the evidence. She said killing Gregory was a complete accident. Her trial started in June of 2003, and as you can see, she was very remorseful. Boo-hoo crying all through her trial. All that crying don't mean nothing though, because on June 27th, 2003, Cleet Jackson was sentenced to 10 years. He has since been released. Herbert Cleveland was sentenced to 9 years. He too has since been released. Shantae Mallard was sentenced to 50 years in prison. She will be eligible for parole in 2027. What blows my mind about this case is this all could have been avoided. You could have got that man some help. He could have lived. You would have caught a little case, caught a little charge, but it wouldn't have been 50 years. I promise you that. You wouldn't have been doing 50. Kind of stupid at. We'll see if she get out next year.